U.S. diplomat Secretary of State Antony Blinken is meeting with officials in China this morning. It's the first visit there by a Secretary of State since 2018, as the Biden administration is trying to reset U.S.-China relations after months of inflamed tensions between the two superpowers. Joining us now, the chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Turner, Republican of Ohio. Thanks for being here, and happy Father's Day to you, sir.
Thank you. Happy Father's Day to you and to my father, Ray, 93.
Oh, nice.
So, very good.
Secretary of State Blinken is in Beijing this morning meeting with top Chinese officials after previously having canceled his trip due to the Chinese spy balloon. This visit comes at the same time that we just learned from the Biden administration that China has had intelligence facilities in Cuba. Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, your colleague, says this visit by Blinken will legitimize the Chinese government's continued subversion of U.S. sovereignty. Do you agree, or are you happy that he's there?
Well, China's definitely feeling the heat. I mean, this is not, in addition to the spy balloon that the whole world watched go across the United States, the issue of the allegations of spying facilities in Cuba. You also have the police stations that have been identified by the administration that they're
in
raiding
in
the United States.
Yeah.
They're spying on Chinese and American citizens. You also have Kevin McCarthy having established in the House on a bipartisan basis a China committee to look just at the issue of China and their threats to the United States. If you recall, the first meeting that Blinken had with the Chinese counterparts in Alaska, they actually chastised him. They came out full bore criticizing the United States. I think you're going to see a much more tempered response from China at this point because they're feeling the heat. They understand that the American public see China now as a threat, and the administration, I think, is turning up the heat.
Let's turn to the Trump indictment because, as the chairman of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, these national security documents are very important, and you know a great deal about the subject. You've seen, actually, some of these documents that were at Mar-a-Lago that are now not there anymore. They allegedly included U.S. nuclear secrets and vulnerabilities. Take a listen to former U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr.
I was shocked by the degree of sensitivity of these documents and how many there were, frankly. He had no right to maintain them and retain them, and he kept them in a way at Mar-a-Lago that anyone who really cares about national security, their stomach would churn at it.
You care about national security. When you saw the insecure way those documents were stored at Mar-a-Lago, did it make your stomach churn?
Well, it's certainly of grave concern. So the chair and ranking of both the House Intel and Senate Intel have seen some of the documents, both from the Biden cache and the Trump documents itself. And I can tell you that from having looked at both of those documents, I have grave concern about both of those type of documents being out in an unsecured place. Both of them included details of national security issues that should not have been outside of a controlled environment.
I take your point. The White House does say that President Biden's team contacted the National Archives the very same day they found these documents. That's obviously not what Trump did. He stonewalled for 14 months and allegedly hid documents from his lawyers in order to obstruct the efforts to return those documents, even after receiving a federal subpoena. Take a listen to Bill Barr, again describing the process.
They talked to him for almost a year to try to get those documents, and he jerked them around. They finally went to a subpoena, and what did he do? According to the government, he lied and obstructed that subpoena. So they acted in a very patient way, and what they were met with was, according to the government and the indictment, very egregious obstruction.
A lot of legal experts look at the indictment and they say, if Donald Trump had just turned over the documents, we wouldn't be here. He wouldn't have been charged with anything.
Right. Well, and I have a great deal of respect for Bill Barr, but I have to correct something that he said. My committee actually brought in the archivists, and we had them testify as to what was occurring in with the issue of the Trump documents. We've released the transcript, and actually the archives was unaware that they had classified documents. The first cache of documents that were delivered to the archives was the first time that they became aware that there were classified documents involved. They were pursuing just presidential records. And then within 4 months of Trump surrendering to them classified documents, when they opened the boxes and were surprised that he even had classified documents, within 4 months, Mar-a-Lago was raided. So it wasn't this entire time, but it certainly was an unacceptable time.
But it is in the view of the government obstruction. Here's your colleague, Republican Congressman Don Bacon, who's an Air Force veteran who knows from national security documents. This is his description of how tough it is for Republicans to defend Trump and whether they should be at all.
We're missing the obvious. We have somebody that has hundreds and hundreds of top secrets in his house. He was showing it to unclear people, and then he lied about it. I'm not in the mode for defending that, and I don't think my colleagues should either.
It does look, if you look at the indictment and the charges are there, I mean, unless there's some defense we have not yet heard, it does look like President Trump broke the law.
Well, and again, this is a legal process that is going to have to go forward. What my committee is doing on a bipartisan basis is looking at, how did this occur? What laws need to be changed? Well, we heard from the archivists that every administration since Reagan has delivered to them documents that included classified and unclassified documents mixed. And 80 members of Congress have sent documents to libraries where the libraries had to subsequently get in touch with them and say, we found classified documents, including Senator Muskie, who had 98 classified documents. This is a systemic problem. Now, with respect to this litigation, it's going to go forward, and I'm certainly not going to defend the behavior that is listed in that complaint. But they're going to have to prove it, and it's a legal process that's going to have to go forward.
Let's talk about a few other topics, because on Tuesday, your committee is going to hear closed-door testimony from Trump-appointed special counsel John Durham. His report concluded that the FBI should not have launched the full Trump-Russia investigation as it did. It would have been okay to do a preliminary one, but not the full-bore one. What do you want to know from former special counsel Durham?
So this is very troubling because, and this is going to be troubling for you, especially as you read the Durham report after the years of which there were these accusations of Trump-Russia collusion, and that these allegations were absolutely false. What's concerning here is not that a campaign would make those accusations. The Clinton campaign did opposition research, or the Clinton campaign made these accusations. It's when it comes to you as the government speaking. When the government opens an investigation over uncorroborated information that they take directly from a political campaign and they make it a government investigation. I mean, this was not just the initial investigation itself, then it resulted in the special prosecutor. Every investigation that has occurred, including now the Durham report, conclusively states that this was a result of people who had political bias, who undertook an investigation based upon total Clinton campaign funded research that was uncorroborated and turned out to be even untrue. And that's where you have to be concerned. When your government's lying to you, when your government is telling you that something has happened that has not happened, that's when our committee has to be involved, and that's when we have to look at what happened here. How do we make certain this doesn't happen again? How do we make certain that we don't have people with a political bias entering into political campaigns and using the authority of the government to have major media and the government take actions that are not based on truth?
You've said you want to explore possible changes to the FBI. Director Wray has said he's already made a ton of changes. And Special Counsel Durham did not recommend, quote, any wholesale changes in the guidelines and policies that the department and the FBI now have in place, unquote. So what do you want to consider changing?
Sure. So what you're talking about is the portion of the Durham report that relates to the FISA, the Foreign Surveillance Act, and the issue of the court itself, and the whole application process where the FBI lied to the FISA court to get.
And that FBI agent, I believe, was disciplined. And prosecuted.
What we have found is that there are problems in the entire process with the FISA courts in which people are not held accountable. And it's across the board that there is, in bipartisan, bicameral, that people believe that this needs to be changed. Now, Durham didn't say, I don't recommend any changes, meaning there are no changes that need to be made. He said in the document...
He said no wholesale changes.
Right. He said in the document he delivered, he didn't think it was appropriate to include those. He did, however, and I've spoken to him directly, agree that he would give us his insight as to what changes he thinks need to be made. And that's the work that our committee's doing. Our committee's doing. We're pulling him in to our committee to say, okay, now that we've seen that there were abuses, that this was wrong, and that there are problems with FISA itself, what are the recommendations that you think we should pursue? Here are some of the things we're looking at. What do you think of these?
So it's a closed-door testimony, closed-door hearing. I hope that you'll, issue whatever you can publicly so we can report on it. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.